Behind every headline mission, the ones involving SEAL Team 6 or Delta Force, there's a name that never makes it into the story. 4 units. None of them famous. None of them by accident. And what each one actually does inside those operations is something almost nobody outside the military ever gets told. This is the chain nobody talks about. And it starts in the air, at night, with almost no light at all. Night Stalkers. At 200 feet above the ground, in complete darkness, with no lights on the aircraft and no margin for a mistake, a pilot from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment is doing something the rest of military aviation was taught to avoid. Most pilots are trained to survive by staying visible, staying predictable, staying in contact with control towers that know exactly where they are. These pilots are trained to do the opposite. They fly low enough that radar has trouble finding them, slow enough that the rotor noise doesn't arrive until the aircraft is already gone, and dark enough that from the ground, most people never even register that something passed overhead. That's the part that should make you uncomfortable. Because flying blind, at night, skimming terrain at helicopter speed, is one of the most statistically dangerous things a human being can strap themselves into. Power lines don't show up well in night vision. Wind shifts near mountains happen without warning. A single miscalculation of altitude at that speed isn't a hard landing, it's a wall. And yet the 160th has built an entire identity around doing exactly that, on purpose, on a schedule, for missions where failure isn't really an option in any meaningful sense. Here's where the discomfort turns into something closer to respect. The reason these pilots can do this isn't bravado. It's repetition most people would find unbearable. Night Stalker pilots train almost exclusively after dark. Not occasionally, as a baseline. Their bodies adjust to operating on inverted schedules for years at a time, because daylight flying is, for their purposes, the exception, not the rule. Night vision goggles narrow a pilot's field of view down to something like looking through 2 toilet paper tubes, and they still thread rotor blades through gaps a football field wouldn't fit through comfortably in daylight. The unit's unofficial motto is Night Stalkers Don't Quit, and it's the kind of line that sounds like a slogan until you understand what it actually refers to: missions where the aircraft has already taken damage, where the extraction point has changed twice, where turning back would be the reasonable decision, and the reasonable decision isn't the one that gets chosen. This is the unit that flew into Abbottabad in 2011. Not Delta Force, not the SEALs who get the credit in the headlines. The 160th flew them there, in modified Black Hawks engineered specifically to reduce noise and radar signature, aircraft so specialized that when one crashed during that mission, its wreckage was treated as a more sensitive intelligence problem than almost anything else on the ground that night. That detail tends to get lost. The story becomes about who was inside the compound. Rarely about who got them there without being detected by one of the most heavily monitored airspaces in the region. What makes the Night Stalkers different from conventional aviation units isn't just skill, it's that their entire selection and training pipeline assumes the worst-case scenario as the standard scenario. Bad weather isn't an exception they train to manage. It's closer to a requirement. If conditions are too dangerous for a normal pilot, that's often exactly the window this unit is built to fly in, because the danger of the weather is what buys the mission its element of surprise. There's a kind of irony in that. The safer the conditions, the more exposed the aircraft actually is. So when people talk about special operations, they tend to picture the operators on the ground, kicking in doors, executing the mission everyone associates with the mission. But none of that happens without someone willing to fly a machine through darkness that swallows depth perception whole, trusting instruments and thousands of hours of muscle memory over what their own eyes can tell them. The 160th doesn't get the movie. They get the credits nobody reads. And once you understand what it actually takes to insert a team undetected into hostile territory at night, the next question becomes obvious, because getting a team in is only half the equation. What happens after they're on the ground, moving deep into territory with no support in sight, is where the next unit picks up the story. Regimental Reconnaissance Company. What does it actually take to be considered elite inside a branch of the military that's already considered elite? That's the question the 75th Ranger Regiment quietly answers every time it selects a handful of its own Rangers and pulls them into a unit most Americans have never once heard mentioned by name, the Regimental Reconnaissance Company. Picture this. A small team, sometimes no more than 4 or 5 operators, dropped into territory with no backup within reach, no quick reaction force waiting nearby, and no plan for extraction if things go loudly wrong. Their job isn't to fight. It's to disappear into the landscape so completely that an enemy force moving through the area has no idea anyone is watching them at all. That's the part that separates this unit from almost every other conventional understanding of what Special Forces means. Direct action units, the ones people picture when they hear terms like Delta Force or SEAL Team 6, are built to hit a target and neutralize it. The RRC is built to do the opposite of getting noticed. They go in first, sometimes days or weeks before anyone else, gathering intelligence on enemy positions, mapping terrain that satellites can't read accurately, and confirming details that determine whether a larger operation happens at all. Here's the lesson buried inside that distinction. In modern warfare, the most dangerous job isn't always the one that pulls the trigger. It's the one that has to survive being close enough to the enemy to see them clearly, without the enemy ever knowing they were seen. Let that sit for a second, because it changes how you should think about every mission you've heard about involving more famous units. None of those missions start with the raid. They start with someone confirming, quietly and at extreme personal risk, that the raid is even worth doing. The Regimental Reconnaissance Company sits at the same operational priority level as America's most publicized direct action units, meaning when a high-value target needs to be found, tracked, or confirmed, the RRC isn't treated as a supporting act. It's treated as equally essential. That alone should tell you something about how the military actually ranks difficulty, versus how Hollywood ranks it. And there's a kind of irony worth sitting with here too. The 75th Ranger Regiment is one of the more publicly known Army Special Operations units, recruiting videos, documentaries, a level of visibility most units in this conversation don't have. Yet buried inside that same regiment is a company so secretive that even many Rangers never interact with its selection process, let alone know exactly what its operators do day to day. Selection for the RRC isn't just about physical endurance, though that's assumed as a baseline. It's about a psychological profile that can tolerate isolation, prolonged uncertainty, and the specific kind of pressure that comes from knowing a single mistake, a sound, a shadow, a broken piece of terrain, could end not just a mission but everyone on the team. That's not the kind of pressure that makes for dramatic action sequences. There's no explosion. Most of the time, if the RRC does its job correctly, nothing visible happens at all. No headline. No footage. Just information that quietly moves up the chain and changes what happens next. Which might be the most honest way to describe this entire unit. Professionals whose highest measure of success is that you never knew they were there in the first place. Before we go further, you've now heard about 2 units most people never learn exist. If either of these is the first time you're hearing their names, drop a comment and let us know. Have you heard of the Night Stalkers or the Regimental Reconnaissance Company before this video? It matters, because what comes next goes even further behind the curtain, into the unit responsible for knowing where the enemy is before anyone, including the Rangers, ever sets foot on the ground. Intelligence Support Activity. Think of every mission you've heard about so far as a play already in motion by the time the audience sees it. The Night Stalkers fly the team in. The Regimental Reconnaissance Company confirms what's on the ground. But before either of those units ever moves, someone has already been listening in the dark, for weeks, sometimes months, and that's where the intelligence support activity comes in. If you had to describe what the ISA does using a single image, it would be this: the unit that reads the enemy's mail before the enemy finishes writing it. Not metaphorically, in most cases. Signals interception, communications tracking, human intelligence gathering on the ground in hostile territory, all of it happening quietly, long before any other special operations unit is authorized to move. That's not a small distinction. Most people assume Special Forces missions begin with a decision, a target gets selected, a team gets briefed, an operation gets greenlit. In reality, that decision is usually the last step in a much longer chain. And the ISA is very often the reason that chain exists at all. They're the ones who identify the target in the first place, confirm the target's pattern of life, and determine whether striking that target is even operationally possible. Here's what makes this unit different from military intelligence in the conventional sense. Most intelligence analysts work with information that's already been collected: satellite images, intercepted communications routed through established systems, reports filed by someone else. ISA operators frequently collect the intelligence themselves, in person, inside environments where being identified as American military personnel could get them killed. They're trained to blend into environments that have nothing to do with combat readiness and everything to do with looking like they belong somewhere they absolutely do not. This is the part that tends to surprise people. Unlike Delta Force or SEAL Team 6, ISA operators aren't necessarily selected for combat performance first. Some of the unit's most valuable operators have skill sets that sound almost unremarkable on paper: fluency in obscure dialects, an ability to move undetected through urban environments, technical expertise in communications systems most people have never heard of. The unit has, at various points, recruited based on criteria that has nothing to do with how fast someone can clear a room. And that's the reflection worth sitting with. Warfare, at its most effective, often has very little to do with force. It has to do with knowing things the other side doesn't realize you know. The ISA reportedly played a role in the operations leading up to the death of Pablo Escobar, tracking communications that helped narrow down his location years before technology made that kind of tracking common. Long before smartphones made location data something every intelligence agency takes for granted, this unit was doing it manually, painstakingly, with equipment that had to be adapted for environments it was never designed for. That should change how you think about every successful mission you've ever read a headline about. The raid gets the coverage. The capture gets the photo. But somewhere earlier in that timeline, invisible to the public record, someone from the ISA had already done the work that made the raid possible, and in most cases, their name will never appear in any account of what happened. There's a kind of quiet cost to that. Operating in this world means existing without recognition by design, not by accident. No medal ceremony with cameras present. No public acknowledgement of what was actually accomplished, because acknowledging it would mean confirming the unit was there in the first place, and confirming that undermines the very secrecy that makes the unit effective. Which brings the picture into full focus. 3 units in, and a pattern starts to emerge: flying without being seen, watching without being detected, listening without being heard. Each one solving a problem the others can't solve on their own. But there's still one piece of this chain unaccounted for. Because eventually, someone has to be close enough to pull a wounded operator out from under fire, coordinate an airstrike within feet of friendly forces, and keep people alive in the exact moment everything else has already gone wrong. 24th Special Tactics Squadron. In 2002, during a firefight on a mountain in Afghanistan that would later become known as one of the deadliest engagements of the early war, a combat controller from the Air Force was on the ground with a team that had just lost the high ground to enemy fire. He wasn't there to shoot his way out. He was there to talk to the sky, coordinating airstrikes with a precision that left almost no room for error, because the margin between hitting the enemy and hitting his own team was measured in meters, not miles. That's the job most people have never heard of, buried inside a branch of the military most people don't associate with ground combat at all. The 24th Special Tactics Squadron exists in the space between the Air Force and the Army's most elite ground units, embedded directly with Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 on missions where air support has to be exact, immediate, and delivered by someone standing close enough to the target to call it in correctly. Sit with that for a second. These aren't pilots directing strikes from a cockpit miles away. These are operators on the ground, in the same firefight as everyone else, carrying the added responsibility of making sure that when bombs or bullets come from above, they land exactly where they're supposed to and nowhere else. The emotional weight of that job doesn't come from the shooting. It comes from the responsibility. A combat controller's mistake doesn't just cost a mission, it can kill the exact team he's supposed to be protecting. There is no version of this job that allows for close enough. And it goes further than air support. The same squadron trains operators as pararescuemen, the ones who go in under fire specifically to reach wounded personnel that other units can't safely extract. Their unofficial motto, that others may live, isn't decoration. It describes, literally, what the job requires, moving toward danger that everyone else is moving away from, because someone has to. Here's the part that reframes everything you've learned in this video so far. Every unit mentioned up to this point depends, at some point, on the 24th STS being there when things go wrong. The Night Stalkers fly teams in, but if that aircraft takes fire, someone from this unit may be the one coordinating the response. The RRC and the ISA operate deep and quiet, but if their cover is blown and a firefight breaks out, air support has to arrive fast, and it has to be exact. That's the Verada worth sitting with. The units everyone recognizes, Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, get the headlines when a mission succeeds. But survival, in the moments when a mission goes sideways, frequently comes down to a combat controller calling in fire with split-second precision, or a pararescueman running toward gunfire to reach someone who's already down. Nobody makes a movie about the person coordinating the airstrike. They make the movie about the raid that airstrike made possible. 4 units. None of them famous. All of them essential to almost every operation you've ever heard about involving the names that do get remembered. And that's really the point of everything in this video. The story you thought you knew about American Special Forces was never complete. It was just the part that made it into the headlines. If this kind of story, the parts of history that never make it to the surface, is something you want more of, this is exactly the kind of channel that goes looking for it. Subscribe, because there are more stories like this one still waiting to be told.